To talk about more recent history. What do you think of when you hear the name James Brown? His music, of course. The godfather of soul is no longer with us physically, but he certainly lives on. He was born in South Carolina, though he more often claimed Georgia as his home state. Author Kevin Alexander Gray has written a very provocative article about Brown and how he is an important part of South Carolina history. Kevin, thank you so much for being with us. Kevin, you know, reading this article, I really enjoyed it, number one.
Thank you.
But in the last few sentences of this article, you said that James Brown should have a statue in South Carolina. Why do you say that?
Well, I mean, we have statues of everybody else. We have statues of Strom Thurmond, statues of Pitchfork Ben Tillman. You got Jim Clyburn holding a golf club. James Brown contributed mightily to the musical history of this country. And when you talk about who's on that Mount Rushmore of music, you think of people like Duke Ellington and Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley and John Lennon and Aretha Franklin. But you put James Brown on that statue, on that monument. James Brown was the godfather of soul. He was the father of modern funk and hip-hop music. And I think he deserves a place or recognition in South Carolina history.
Why do you think that James Brown did not often say, "I'm from South Carolina," and be proud of it?
You know, I think a lot of people have a conflicted relationship with their home. They have conflicted relationships with their family. South Carolina is truly a place of conflict. You know, at the turn of the century, there were more Africans in South Carolina than there were Europeans. And when you look at, you know, the whole racial history of the United States, well, it all starts here in South Carolina with the majority of Africans coming over and landing at Sullivan's Island. And so there's always been this conflicted relationship that people have with their home. And, you know, James was known around the world. In many respects, he didn't want people to know that he was that country boy from Barnwell, South Carolina. Because, as you and I know, the reality is, even though James, you know, when James was released from prison when he was a teenager, they told him to go back to South Carolina and not to come back to Georgia. He really never left Georgia or that area, but he did move back to that Beach Island area in later years, and he never moved 40 miles away from the family home in Barnwell and that James C. Brown plantation that his family came from in Barnwell County.
So how is, you mentioned James Brown and Strom Thurmond in the same sentence.
Yeah, I mean, listen, James Brown says, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." Strom Thurmond says, "Segregation forever." But neither one of them practiced what they preached. You know, look at how James ended his life, and he had the son with his legally questionable last wife. And, of course, we all know the story of Essie Mae Washington Williams. So, you know, both of them had the whole racial thing going on. And you know, Strom represented the leadership in the so-called white supremacist movement. But when you look at the movement of the 60s and 70s and what black folk went through, "Say it loud and I'm black and I'm proud" was the anthem of our movement, more so than even "We Shall Overcome."
So, but you know, I think of James Brown and I think of the processed hair and the dancing around and the ultimate entertainer kind of picture. Are you saying that he's really more important to us in our history in South Carolina in a more fundamental kind of way?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole idea of soul music, the whole idea of what the blues are, I mean, the blue note, finding that bottom beat that's connected to people struggling, connected to their happiness, connected to their lives, good, bad, ugly. I mean, James kind of was the quintessential ambassador of what the blue note represented. And so when you look at, as I said, sound, I mentioned it in this piece, when you look at the sound history of our country, Motown, you know, and James Jemerson, who also came from Edisto Island, who played that bass line behind most of the Motown hits. I mean, obviously, that's the music that a lot of people draw on now. So it's only, and most hip-hop artists will readily confess that, you know, James Brown is their inspiration. They're sampling James Brown's music. And of course, as I wrote in the piece, you know, when you think about some of the things that James Brown said, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud," get on the good foot. You know, when you got to do something, you got to get up and move, you've got to work, you got to get on the good foot. Well, we're in a political season when you hear politicians talking loud and saying nothing. Like a dull knife, you just can't cut it.
Do you think, though,